Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined, as always, by my trusted colleague, Weston Hodkowitz, and he's right here in the studio. Hi, Wes.
Hey, Michael.
It's been a while.
It's been a minute since we've been in this setup, but I'll tell you what, kind of like hopping on a bike, going back to your grandparents' house, you just feel right back at home.
That's
I'm
right.
happy to be back in the studio with you.
That's right. It's like we never left in some ways. But we do have a lot to talk about on this show. First and foremost, the 53-man roster for the Green Bay Packers, which is still undergoing some adjustments here and there. But the biggest thing that stands out about this Packers roster heading into the 2023 season, Wes, is it is awfully young.
It is. Now, we won't be able to get the actual NFL superlatives on where the Packers rank and how they do all that kind of data management. The NFL will pump that out after week one. But at this point in time, I know Jason Wilde was crunching some of the numbers. Some other people on Twitter were doing it. An average age right around 25 for Green Bay, which is incredibly low compared to obviously the most recent years. But then when you look at the NFL and the way things are structured, usually it's more in that 26, 27 range. But the Green Bay Packers right now with only one player, I think, over 30, and that's David Bakhtiari after the decision to let go of Pat O'Donnell. So it gives you an idea of where they're heading. One of the things I really did enjoy, Mike, we're going to touch on a lot of topics here, but Brian Gutekunst's press conference, one of the first things we heard after the final cuts were announced, him mentioning, yes, we are young, but the expectations don't change. The Green Bay Packers still have very high expectations for this season. It just so happens that it's going to be with a roster that is a little bit younger than the norm.
Yeah, and Gutekunst talked about how, and he's mentioned this many times before, that this roster is built with a lot of young players that he's expecting are going to grow together and mature together and whatnot. But it's not as though everybody's just supposed to wait for an entire season to be in the books before that happens. 17 games is a long time. Yeah. It's a long season. This team is expected to look and play much differently in November and December when all these young players have, 8, 9, 10 games under their belts than perhaps they do in the beginning. And this is going to be, I think more so than any other that we've seen in Green Bay in our time here, a season of evolution with regard to what this team is going to look like and how it's going to play and how the coaching staff is going to figure out, most specifically on the offensive side of the ball, what this team does best and what it can hang its hat on. Because and we'll see the roster change throughout the course of the season. It always does. But in terms of the actual play on the field, we may be looking at a very different team in the second half of the season than the one in the first half of the season as everybody figures things out.
More so than any other year I've covered. Now, you were here during some of the very early years of the Mike McCarthy era. Those teams also trended very young as well. But to me, I look at it as also a huge opportunity because more than any other year, I think whether it was covering final cuts and the roster construction of the practice squad, there's so much young talent at all these positions, right? When you look at receiver, how deep Green Bay goes with a guy like Malik Heath making this roster. Grant Dubose comes back on the practice squad. But then you also have, Jaden Reed coming in and as, Brian Gutekunst even said, looking a lot more polished than I think a lot of people thought he was going to as a rookie second-round pick. The tight end situation with Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft, defensively, this plethora of defensive linemen that are going to be stepping in with Kenny Clark into this starting lineup. I think that is where the Packers really can separate themselves this year because I give Matt LaFleur a lot of credit. I give Mike McCarthy a lot of credit. Their teams did typically get better throughout the course of the year. They always seem to play their best ball in December is the reason why Matt LaFleur's record is what it is during the final month of the season. But that being said, the ceiling, the upside, the limitless potential of this group, I think is going to be what, are going to make the biggest difference. I made a joke, not a joke, it was serious, but kind of a quip, if you will, in Insider Inbox about people asking about the opener against Chicago and the importance of it. It's huge. It's a really important game. But it pales into comparison of what the Week 18 game against the Chicago Bears should be and what the Packers want that game to be. And I think throughout the course of this year, you're going to see this team take its lumps at times, but I think you're going to see tremendous growth as well.
Yeah, and for all the anticipation and excitement about Week 1 against the Chicago Bears at Soldier Field, it just feels like win or lose, whatever the score is, there's almost nothing about that game that's going to define the 2023 Green Bay Packers. And Week 1 never really defines any team, but even more so this year, it seems that that's going to be this team just getting out of the starting blocks, but you don't know what the rest of that race is going to look like. Well, one of the reasons that this team is as young as it is statistically is because not one, not two, but 3 undrafted rookies made this 53-man roster. You wrote about them on our website. There's a story on Packers.com to check out. And, of course, I'm talking about receiver Malik Heath, who you already mentioned, running back Emanuel Wilson, who won the number 3 running back job, and then outside linebacker Brenton Cox Jr. It keeps a streak going now of 19 years in which the Packers will have an undrafted rookie on their week one roster, but more so than just the streak. 3 guys in a year in which the Packers had 13 draft picks. 3 undrafted guys ended up busting through and making the 53. It's a credit to them, also a credit to the scouting department that the building of the team, the acquisition of new players doesn't end when the draft ends. There are a lot of guys that are brought in here to get a look, and the ones that take advantage of that opportunity, sometimes they stick around.
Well, and it's funny to me because college free agency, it's such a free-for-all, right? I mean, now certainly you build some relationships, you make some phone calls, but it literally is just teams being able to just grab whatever players they can get afterwards. I mean, it's like it's like college recruiting on like just a complete trip, right? Where it's like you're just trying to get as many people as possible. But I think Brian Gutekunst and his scouts, in my opinion, this was the strongest UFA class they've had so far. Because I think there's guys on this practice squad, too, that can play in this league. It's just the way the numbers work out. But those 3 guys, I think, all stood out for very different reasons. When you look at Malik Heath, I think there are a lot of parallels there with him and Romeo Doubs. This is a guy that, one, did not look like an undrafted free agent. But at times, I'll be honest with you, Mike, there was times in the OTAs, I'm like, is this guy even a rookie? I mean, he was wise beyond his years. And as Brian Gutekunst said when he addressed the media on Wednesday, this is a guy that had some stuff happen in college. He would have probably gotten drafted had it not been for that. But the Packers, they do their background checks. They feel good about these players. The same thing with Brenton Cox Jr. And they bring him in and give an opportunity in a clean slate. I thought Heath completely maximized that. Led the Packers in receiving, 12 catches for 146 yards in the preseason. He was able to be a starter with the offense with Romeo Doubs dealing with a hamstring in the preseason finale. Kind of a precautionary thing, but the Packers wanted to give Heath that opportunity and made a big catch on the 15-play, 80-yard drive. Everything you wanted to see from Heath in this game, in this preseason, you saw it, whether it was the pass catching or even him blocking a guy into a field goal net on the sidelines. And then quickly, just to touch on with Emanuel Wilson, here's a guy that spent 3 days in Denver after the draft, got cut, ends up in Green Bay. He had taken a top 30 visit here. There was interest from Green Bay, but is looking at a pretty tall depth chart where you have Patrick Taylor coming back, special teamer, 4th-year veteran. You had Tyler Goodson looking really good after working out this offseason with Aaron Jones. And then Lou Nichols, who was the 7th-round pick out of Central Michigan as a rookie. Injuries happen. Wilson gets his opportunity, and as I wrote in that story, he just made himself undeniable. Yeah,
and it's funny. I admit I was steered wrong in some respects on the number 3 running back competition because when Wilson's star was starting to rise, we heard from Matt LaFleur, I believe it was after the New England preseason game, and he was talking about, well, he's got a long ways to go in pass protection. He hasn't done too much on special teams. We really need him to work on his conditioning, to be able to carry the ball 15, 16 times in a game. I thought, okay, they're just, they're downplaying this and they're going to try to slip him through to the practice squad. This is not a guy who's going to make the roster. And lo and behold, when push came to shove and the decision had to be made, they're like, no, this is our number 3 running back. This is the guy that we want on the 53. I think with Brenton Cox, it's a very interesting case. As most folks know, he had some off-the-field issues. He was dismissed from 2 programs in the Southeastern Conference. Packers give him a chance as an undrafted guy. They say, hey, same thing with Malik Heath in a lot of ways. It's like, hey, it's a clean slate here. You get to start over, so make the most of it. And And he does. And what you have now for the Packers at outside linebacker, you've got Preston Smith and Rashawn Gary. Right behind them, you have a first-round draft pick in Lucas Van Ness, a second-year guy in Kingsley Enagbari who showed some real potential as a rookie. You got Justin Hollins, a veteran who came in last year, played a half a dozen games and made an impact in Joe Barry's defense. And then you're adding Brenton Cox as a sixth guy to that group. It's almost like adding another draft pick because from a talent perspective, Brenton Cox would have been drafted, and who knows, maybe, I mean, I don't want to make a prediction necessarily, but probably anywhere from like the 3rd to the 5th round maybe is where his talent could have fallen.
It's a 5-star recruit.
Without anything else in the equation. So it's as though the Packers took the outside linebacker group they ended last season with. You're bringing back Rashawn Gary, and you added 2 draft picks in Lucas Van Ness and Brenton Cox Jr. This group, as far as the edge rusher group to get after quarterbacks, this is as deep as Matt LaFleur has had since he's been here. I think that's going to be a boon for Joe Barry as he devises what to do defensively.
And I think that's the most impressive thing, Mike, is you look at running backs, outside linebackers, and receivers. Those are 3 of the deepest positions the Packers had in their roster. And these guys, it isn't like they just, we needed a 4th guy to fill out a depth chart. All these guys competed to earn those spots. And now the possibilities of this group. I look at that defensive front too, Mike, the ways you can mix and match guys. Rashawn Gary, it sounds like he's going to be on a pitch count earlier this season, according to Matt LaFleur, as they try to work him back. But you got a guy like Kingsley Enagbari to eat some of those snaps. You have Justin Hollins. You're bringing along 2 rookies along with them. It's an intriguing group. And I think that's, again, getting back to that upside and this sky's the limit for this group. That is going to be what carries them, I think, throughout the course of this season.
Yeah. Want to get to some other thoughts on the roster, but we'll take care of some sponsor business here first. Sirius XM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. And at Cousin Subs, we have something for everyone, like our Wisconsin cheese curds, mac and cheese, golden fries, and creamy shakes, all paired with your favorite sub or sub in a bowl. Cousin Subs, 50 years of better. All right, a couple other thoughts with regard to the roster. One is that we saw with the decisions with this 53 how much not just the size of the practice squad being 16 players now over the last couple years, but the flexibility that the league allows with regard to game day elevations. Yep. Now, there are limitations on certain, players. Once you elevate a guy 3 times, then you have to make a more definitive decision on his roster status. But that kind of flexibility, being able to elevate players from the practice squad to the active roster for game day, I think is why the Packers were able to send in their 53 with only 4 cornerbacks on it. Because in this day and age, you've got 4 cornerbacks on the field in a game, like, quite a bit. I mean, you need to have more than that. But do you need to have more than that on your 53? Not necessarily, because of the practice squad game day elevations. The other thing that stood out to me, and you touched on a little bit with the defensive line, but also just the number of big guys that the Packers kept, ended up being 11 offensive linemen, although the expectation is that Luke Tenuta will most likely be moved to injured reserve, and it will be down to 10 on the active roster. But even that says something, because they wanted to carry Luke Tenuta through to the 53 because he's a big guy that they believe can play in this league, and just because he got hurt, they didn't want to lose him and let him go. We had talked all off season about how deep this offensive line was, how many guys the Packers were bringing back who were either on the active roster or the practice squad from last year. And this is a group. This offensive line, I think, is really the group that forms the foundation of this team, particularly on offense, when everybody else, the wide receivers, the tight ends, and the quarterback are also young and inexperienced.
Yeah, I mean, the Packers have some real skyscrapers, at the tackle position. I always say that same story. When Josh Nijman got here in 19, I'm like, wow, that is a really big tackle. And then Caleb Jones got here last year, and I'm like, he's bigger than Josh.
Yeah, he's even bigger.
Luke Tenuta, I mean, Tenuta and Josh actually played together at Virginia Tech, and it's like these are just monstrous, types of tackles. And the Packers want to see what's there. They want to try to develop it. It is funny to me that they have all these tackles, and then you got a guy like Zach Tom, who's not the biggest offensive lineman in the world, and he ends up, basically winning that right tackle job, finesse, footwork, technique, intelligence, and is probably going to be the backup at potentially every spot now on the Packers offensive line, depending on if injuries should happen. I really like the way that the offensive line competition played out in camp, because I thought you saw strides from a lot of those draft picks the Packers had last year. Rasheed Walker might have been the most improved player in camp from where he was at pound for pound to where he got to this year, blocking for Jordan Love in the 2 preseason finales on the left tackle side. Sean Ryan, I thought, put a better effort forward this year. He talked about cleaning up his diet, getting better sleep, just being smarter about how he handled everything. I think that's very important right now, and trying to see exactly where that could all potentially fit. Lastly, just to quickly touch on this, 2 preseason games, Mike, the last 2 preseason games, no quarterback hits allowed. It's preseason, I get it.
Yeah.
But the fact that that group went that deep, everybody earned their spot there. As much as that probably caught some people by surprise with 11 offensive linemen, I thought that group, by and large, they earned their keep.
Yeah, and we've seen it before. When you don't have that kind of depth on the offensive line, you get into the 2s and the 3s in the preseason games, and the offense just becomes a mess, and it can't even function because you don't have enough continuity and enough execution up front to be able to make anything work and to be able to get a look at these other players and see what they can do. Packers didn't have that problem in this preseason because the offensive lines through the multiple units held up and allowed the offense to function, and we saw what Sean Clifford could do. We saw what Alex Magoo did on the final, what turned out to be the game-winning drive against Seattle in the finale. The guys up front on this Packers roster, as you said, they got the job done. They earned their spots,
and they gave a guy like Emanuel Wilson the opportunity to end up leading the NFL in preseason rushing yards. Mike, you and I have covered a lot of preseason football, not just talking about the Green Bay Packers, just NFL in general, seeing different teams come in. A guy having 223 rushing yards in the preseason does not happen a lot, especially on 38 carries or whatever it was that he ended up having.
And in only 3 preseason games as opposed to 4, the way it used to be.
Exactly. I was so impressed by the young man, but it's also the partnership, the synergy that goes with the offensive line. Again, it's a very impressive preseason, and now the Packers hope that being able to plant all these pieces for this offense, defense, and special teams, that can ultimately be what is going to be the thing that kind of catapults them into the season of transition here at Jordan Love at quarterback.
Yeah. One last thing I want to touch on, I guess we'll call it a tease, because I'm going to be writing a story on this very shortly on Packers.com. So when you have a chance, look for it. I'm not sure exactly when it's going to get posted. We talked on our last show about the decision at punter because Pat O'Donnell had already been released. The Packers had decided that Daniel Whelan would be their punter, and his story is something else, Wes. It's not just that he, was born in Ireland. He moved to the United States when he was 13 years old. He first played football as a 17-year-old high school junior, was just talked into it by the coach to come out to be the kicker and punter, be the specialist on the team. Goes to a small college in California, gets a chance with the Saints as an undrafted rookie. It doesn't work out there. He's released. And then, he goes to the XFL and then ends up coming to Green Bay. But there's so much else that's in between there, including from the time that he was released by the Saints until he stepped onto the field in the XFL. He was folding towels for 8 hours a day in a hotel spa. Like, that was his job out in California, just trying to figure out, okay, what's next? What am I going to do? Then the XFL comes along. And then not only does he get a shot with the Packers, but he's got to beat out a 10-year veteran, a guy who has absolutely been there, done that, the holding for field goals, the cold weather, all of it. And he gave a big thanks to Pat O'Donnell for not only the way O'Donnell handled the situation, but the way he helped him, particularly with regard to holding on field goals. He said just watching, it wasn't even so much what O'Donnell said, but just watching the way he did things, the way he went through the drills and all that, he learned a lot himself, and so much so that he tried to do between 250 and 300 holds per day while he was here in Green Bay. And whether that was Matt Orzik or Broughton Hatcher, the 2 long snappers the Packers had on the offseason roster, snapping to him, sometimes it was the special teams coaches would fire simulated snaps back to do the holding. And when he was back home in California with his mother between mandatory minicamp and the start of training camp, she was lobbing snaps to him in the kitchen, and he was practicing doing the holding on the linoleum floor in the kitchen, and he said, "Yeah, my mom's simulated snaps weren't the best, but it's kind of like a bad ball drill. You got to work on catching the bad ones too." So it was really fun to talk to him, and I'll be putting that story together soon, but a heck of a story, and he's going to be the first Irish-born player in how many years is it?
38 years, 1985. Neil McDonoghue's last year in the NFL with the St. Louis Cardinals was the last time.
Yeah, and he actually, somebody had tweeted something that O'Donoghue had said, I think in a media interview or something, and then tweeted it at Whelan, because O'Donoghue wished him well and all that kind of stuff. So he hasn't directly connected with him, but through social media and whatnot, he's gotten a message from him. So a fun story, and the Packers are as young as you get at both kicker and punter now heading into 2023.
Yeah, somebody asked in inbox. I did my best to figure this out. Maybe Cliff or you will do a better job of me. It seemed like the first time since 1983 since the Packers have not had a guy that has actually played in the NFL on their roster. But even then, that comes with an asterisk because Jan Stenerud was still there with Eddie Garcia. So it's going to be unprecedentedly young at that spot. But Daniel Whelan, man, the one thing you and I saw from the beginning of OTAs on, the kid has a huge, huge foot.
Yeah,
and he boomed some complete moon balls throughout this camp.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting to watch his career grow and develop as well. But with that, we will call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of the team on Packers.com. For Wes, I am Mike. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We will see you next time.